Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. This is a very special episode because it's a talk with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Cathy Rogers, who has just produced an amazing book. This book is not the sort of thing we normally talk about on the Fully Charged Show, but it is relevant. It is aimed at children between sort of the ages of around 8 to 12, and it's about the future. It's about how the future will be better, not worse than it is today. It's about optimism. It's about the possibilities of how we can change the world to the better. And it is really a lovely book. I just want you to check it out. If you've got children in your life somewhere that are of an age group that might appreciate this, it's definitely something that would inspire a conversation. Future visions, stories of our brilliant tomorrow. And I will let Cathy explain it because it's a really clever book. But also, just so that you know, Cathy and I worked on a television program many years ago called Scrapheap Challenge, and we do mention that a little bit at the beginning. Anyway, please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show podcast. I like to say this early on, and tell your mates about it. You know, if you've got an annoying uncle that thinks we're all doomed and we're going to have to live on fossil fuels for the next million years, tell them to maybe tune into this, and we might be able to shift their opinion. I doubt it. Anyway, please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, Dr. Cathy Rogers. This episode of the Fully Charged podcast is brought to you by OVO's Charge Anywhere. Charge Anywhere helps you power your car wherever you are, plan your route and pay. You'll have access to over 34,000 chargers across the UK's largest charging networks and more than 400,000 chargers across Europe. Setup is easy. Just download the OVO Charge app, create your account, add payment details, hit the road and start charging. There's no need to be an OVO customer either. Simply pay as you go or benefit from up to 15% off your charging with monthly boost packages. OVO's Charge Anywhere. Power your next journey with peace of mind. Cathy.
Hello.
So exciting to do this. It feels like more of a treat than a job to come and talk to you about this. And I just finished the book on the train this morning, and it's so genius, but I want to get to that in a bit.
Okay.
So I want to explain to our lovely viewers and listeners why we know each other and how long we've known each other.
More than our maths can probably do, I think.
25 years plus, isn't it?
Yes. Let's just leave it at that, because that makes us feel reasonably still.
So I met you in a converted fire station.
Yes.
Upstairs above a fire station in Fulham?
In Fulham,
In Fulham, in London.
Yeah.
And you were talking about a television programme that went on to be relatively successful. Would you like to tell our viewers what that was called?
I think at the time it was probably called Scrapheap.
Yes.
Because it didn't get the challenge until a bit later. And also I think we were looking originally for highly qualified, scientifically knowledgeable presenters. But then we found you, and that was so much better.
Yeah. But and that 4 years, so we worked together on that for 4 years, I think so.
Yeah, we were trying to remember. So we did the pilot, I think, in 97. 97.
Yes, it was. And then the first series, 98.
First series was just you.
Yeah.
And then...
From the second series
but we were working on it together, but I was behind camera. And then we did 2 or 3 series
3 years
together.
Oh, I think certainly 3, because it was 2001.
2001 is when it became also Junkyard Wars. And I then moved to LA and we did that funny thing where we made that whole series of Scrapheap Challenge in LA the
with
States.
English teams that flew out.
English teams and English scrap.
Yes.
Like, you remember we had to fly out like knackered old
that.
minis and things like that.
To dress the set.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just in Hampshire.
Yeah. Hot in Hampshire, isn't
39 degrees centigrade in Hampshire. Yeah.
So that was 2001.
Wow.
And then I think we saw sense that probably wasn't a long-term solution. And then the British series carried on here, and the American series carried on there. Yeah.
But that was, but what was amazing, I think that first year, just for people to know, didn't we make the whole episode in one session?
Yes.
I was going to say one day, but it was more than one day.
A very long day.
It leaked over into a second day.
Well, there was a classic moment so we would, the teams would build all day, and then we'd have a bit of time to tinker and to set the kind of like
the
race
course up.
and we would shoot it then. I mean, it was very dramatic because it was sometimes like it was in the dark, and so it had to be all lit. So the one I remember is the power pullers one.
Yes.
That we filmed on the kind of like slag heaps next door to the scrap heap. And I remember you disappeared when we were trying to do a piece to camera. And I think were found asleep on some grade 3.2 gravel.
That was where I discovered. So there were piles of aggregate.
That's what aggregate. Thank
slag.
you. Sorry.
Piles of aggregate that go like that, big, huge piles. And I tried one, and it was very rough. And when you lay on it, was really uncomfortable, and you slid down. Then I tried another, like almost sand, and that was just you slide off it. So it was 3.2 mil aggregate. Is exquisitely comfortable.
It's the modern Goldilocks story, isn't it?
So I fell fast asleep. But to say, like, oh, poor old Git, he was already falling asleep then. It was 2 in the morning.
It was.
It wasn't like
was nuts.
10 o'clock at night.
So I think we did, there were 6 shows in that
we
first
didn't do all
series.
the tests.
I think 3 were that same day, and then the other 3 were the next day.
But that was insane.
Yeah, that was insane.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's us complaining. All we had to do was kind of like sit around, like, doing our nails and doing the occasional chat.
There were people doing moving
actual
cameras
work.
and the likes, and making machines that worked.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that was, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this, but the thing that still stays with me to this day is I will meet engineers and people who work in the automotive industry and in aerospace and in all sorts of stuff who said, I got this job because of Scrapheap. You know, it's not 1 or 2, it's hundreds of people like that. It had an enormous impact.
It is amazing. And I think you've interviewed Hannah Ritchie for your show, and I mean, she's a hero of mine. I think it's incredible the work that she does, and she, you know, that was her Sunday night with her dad watching Scrapheap. I mean, not that we can really take all the credit from everybody, but
I mean, I think
it's a little seed of something.
But I think it's important. I just wanted to sort of highlight the fact that it could have happened without any of the other people that were involved, that people might have seen on telly or the teams or anybody. But it wouldn't have happened without you. It was your idea initially. That was what. I mean, can you do that story about Apollo 13? That idea was so. It was the catalyst of what became Scrapheap.
Yeah, and I have to credit somebody called Eve Kay, who I worked with at the time. So it was a time when we were doing lots of development in lots of different areas, and me and Eve and I think another researcher were kind of like the science and engineering, sort of like trying to come up with ideas. And that film came out at the time. And that scene that was so memorable from the movie was when they tipped out a load of what looked like a rubbish bin of what they had up there in the space capsule. And from this, they had to generate something that was going to save save their lives and save the mission. And there was something in that idea that got us. We went off on a few sort of red herrings of ideas.
Yeah. Well, with people up the top of a tower, a crane tower. I remember once with a walkie-talkie.
Yeah, trying to like.
There's a bit of wood over there. Go grab that and saw it in half.
And there was also a version where we were going to try and find real historical stories of when people were stuck in the desert and found that if they weed into the petrol tank and did such and such, you know, so, but they were quite hard to find. And then I think it was actually David Frank who just sort of said the word, it's like a scrap heap or something like that. And that opened up the idea of actually that thing of them turning out the bin full of bits. Let's just do that on a massive scale.
What is great though, because that was very modest of you and very humble of you, because ever since I started Scrapheap, I've always said it was entirely 100% Cathy's idea, and it wouldn't exist without her. So there were other. It was very generous of you to do.
There's never. I mean, I do think
those things are never one.
They're never one person, and it is just its little spot. It's very much like the show itself. It's like little sparks of ideas from lots of different people, and suddenly you realise that you've got something. And even like the first series, I'm sure you'll remember, because we had you in all sorts of funny outfits doing kind of like weird medieval proclamations and things.
Because of course there are siege engines and all that stuff. Yes,
exactly. So we went a bit Vorsprung durch Technik. Do you remember that? As they said in another time.
Yes.
And you try things out, and I think it became clear after the first series there were lots of things that we wanted to change.
Well, because it was the same teams as well. It was the same people, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, one of whom Was Dick Strawbridge.
Dick Strawbridge.
Yeah.
That's where I think you and I launched his very illustrious career.
It's
And
great
he's
that
never
we
thanked
still
us.
get a cut from everything he does. Yeah, so it was the same teams. And also we realised, I think we learned a lot about the sheer level of skill that the teams need to be able to actually get through it. But yeah, then I think there were lots of things that we did differently for the second series, particularly like having it be a knockout and a bit more all or nothing really made a difference, and having a bit more time between building and testing and lots of stuff. But yeah, so everyone brings an extra bit that shapes it in a new way.
But it was one of those ones where I definitely thought, because I think that was this is my take. I can do it in one sentence. I'm going to really try. Was that then I'd done quite a few weird, quirky Channel 4 one-off, science-ish, vaguely that kind of related stuff that would never seen again. Hollywood Science. I remember that was a great.
Science.
Actually, that was BBC, but that was a short series that was a really, I thought, really good idea.
Yeah, same.
And it was a one-off. And then when we finished Scrapheap, I went, it's just, why can't I do something that goes on? It's not fair. It's a one-off. No one's going to watch it. It's finished. I'll do something else. And that was 10 years before we actually got to the end of it. It lasted a long time.
I know, it is still. Well, I guess there were a few things, because I think Time Team was around at the time, and I think that had sort of tapped into a pool of really interested people who weren't normally the kind of people who were on telly.
Yeah.
And I think and there was Robot Wars around the same time, which again, it was like, oh, suddenly it's not just that this is a really niche interest. There are lots of people who are who really care about building robots. Yeah. And I think that we also just put people on screen and celebrated skills that hadn't really been celebrated before. Yeah. And it turned out that there are loads of people, and you go outside still now and you see so many people who've got little building projects with their cars or in their drives or whatever it is. And I think that just is, in Britain and elsewhere, I think that there's just a lot of people who have building.
Because I do remember, I don't know if I bet you wouldn't have this because you're too nice, but I was a bit snooty about Americans when we went to do Junkyard Wars. So I did a few I can't even remember how it worked out, but I did some specials or something. And I went, the Americans are all going to be, they want the right tools and they'll have to have the, and they were, and I thought they'd be rubbish at it. I thought it's a British thing. We can bodge things together. But what was it, Kluge?
Kluge,
we can kludge that. But they were amazingly good, hardworking, inventive, clever engineers. We met extraordinary people there, didn't we?
Yes.
Amazing.
And actually, I mean, I should mention this because you weren't in it, Robert, so it obviously didn't succeed and come back for many series, but we did a show called Full Metal Challenge, which was like Scrapheap on steroids, and we had teams from 27 countries, I think, like from China, from Chile, from literally all over the world. And that made me realise it's not just a British thing, that actually probably there's a word for bodge
in every language.
Every single language.
But then, okay, let's leave scrappers there. It was a wonderful experience for all involved. But then, before we get to that, then, so you carried on working in sort of television production for a bit after you stopped doing Scrapheap, didn't you? I mean, when you did, you did other shows, but then because I can't work out when you stopped doing telly. No,
because I kind of stopped a couple of times. I think that's why. Right. So I stopped first, I think, in 2005.
Right.
And that was just, I don't know, maybe it was to do with Scrapheap and Junkyard Wars ending, and it was like then became the era of the infinitely replicable format show.
Yes,
the kind of wife swaps and those kind of things, and I wasn't such a fan of those. Yeah. And I just felt like I'm done, I've had good time. And then that's when my partner and I moved to Italy and had olive oil.
Yes, and you had children.
You had children, had olives, lived the dream. Did retirement for a few years. No, it wasn't retirement. It was kind of like trying to do a proper company.
But a big change,
a massive change. Yeah. But then I came back to telly.
I just remembered because actually my wife Judy told me this morning, didn't you meet Cathy in Rome? And I went, no. Oh yeah. We did. You were living in Rome, and I was filming a thing about religion in Rome.
Yes.
And we had a coffee
good
together.
Memory, Judy.
Yes, I'd not even thought about it.
Very good.
I don't know what year. I have no idea.
That would have been about 2008, because child number 2 was born in Rome.
In Rome,
so
really?
We were only there
Wow.
we were there for about a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing, really. I don't know. It sounds so, I lived in Gloucestershire. And my children were born in Gloucestershire. Oh, what, both of them? Yeah.
I know, she quite likes
one
the
of our
glamour
children was born in Rome,
yeah.
one was, I can't even remember.
But then I came back to work in telly for various complicated reasons. Yeah, so there was a sort of like double exit, which is why it is quite complicated. Yeah. And in that period of time, so that was when...
I've just remembered coming to the RDF offices much later in a Tesla Roadster, a little sports car.
Yes, there you go. So that was probably in that
much later.
period.
That would have been 2007, 2008.
Yes.
9 might have been.
Yeah, I think it was because I think we did a Scrapheap 10th anniversary special. There was something around that time.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I came back, but at that point the TV company had become part of this big multinational thing, and so I was working there then, and there was a good thing which jumped onto a next chunk of my life, which was a series called The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds, which I don't know. I hope in our great tradition you never saw that show.
I remember it. I don't remember seeing it. Should we explain that? Because a lot of people think that not assume, but they might think, oh, Robert did that because Cathy'd seen him on Red Dwarf. You'd never seen Red Dwarf. Never seen Red Dwarf. And then you might
Still never seen it on telly, but I did break that.
You did come and see it in a recording. But then also you were in a band for a long time, which I never saw and never heard. I think I've got a CD,
but
I've never listened to it.
And I've got several of your books on the bookshelf.
And you've never read them?
Never touched. Yeah, it's weird because I feel like we are quite supportive of one another, but just not in that way.
Not in that way, but I've read this.
Have you?
Yes.
Yeah, you've broken all the tradition. Will fall apart
I should have
now.
not looked at it. I should have looked at the cover. But then you did, and then I remember when you were at Somewhere Clever with Brains.
Yeah, well, so that was the connection. So the series, The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds, was basically a developmental psychology series, sort of masquerading as a soap opera about toddlers.
Yeah.
And that got me really interested in the idea of sort of understanding more about brains and creativity.
I mean, we should mention that you did a bit of medical training pre-Scrapheap.
I did, I did a little bit. I'm pretty good on upper arm. I did upper arm twice, Oh. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Slightly random.
But you're you were doctorish. Is that fair to say?
It's the doctor-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, doctor adjacent.
Doctor adjacent.
But yeah, I think having realised for the second time, I've kind of done enough of the telly thing, and I don't particularly want to do it more. I wasn't sure what to do, but I had a itch to scratch, which was going back to studying.
Right.
So that's when I did my PhD. And the connection was with that show was the PhD was in the area of educational neuroscience.
Right.
So it was studying like how do we do creativity? Like what is that in terms of the brain? Like what is the process? So
which is kind of being highlighted in a wider thing now with AI. It's some thing of what is creativity, are we more unique than an incredibly complicated and intelligent
Absolutely.
computer?
And I think a lot of things that we thought were absolutely true, like I think even with people that had quite high hopes for AI, they also had quite sort of like solid lines between what AI will be really good at and what it won't. And creativity was always kind of spared.
Yes.
It was like a special, unique human thing, which actually I think when you look at how it happens in terms of brain processes, you realise, there are some things which are sort of unusual about it compared to normal types of thinking. But there's nothing that means that it's going to be spared from things that AI can do, sorry to say. I mean, you've seen that. And actually now I find that one thing that from ideas meetings to any kind of creative thing that I've ever done, one thing that I've always relied on is someone in the room who is like the dripping tap of ideas. Like someone who doesn't censor themselves, but who just doesn't mind throwing things out. Because that's what I like, is then like finding like what are the little sparks. And ChatGPT, but you would feel bad about sort of it's slightly exploitative of a person, whereas ChatGPT, I'm happy to say, give me 100 dripping tap ideas about such and such a thing, and then I'll use take those and, use whatever is useful and chuck away the rest with no harm done.
Which is quite extraordinary and challenging.
I know.
I haven't done that yet. I know it's there and I know it's coming, but I haven't used any.
Haven't you?
No. And I'm surprised because in a way, in our history with each other,
you're
I must
ahead.
have been the one who's tried. Have you used, I find Twitter really useful. Have a look. Or all those things. Or I'm going to make a thing put it on YouTube. It was like that was
totally.
all I was really.
And that blooming Palm Pilot. You made me get a Palm Pilot where you had to learn these weird hieroglyphics to turn into normal letters. Yeah, so you were always the leader. So I'm surprised that you haven't.
No, it hasn't. I don't know why yet. It hasn't. And our team, so the production team are using it. They go. They're sort of they no longer use Google to search for things. They use ChatGPT.
Yes.
They look up things. That's how they find it.
Yeah.
And I just haven't. I know I will.
I mean, you don't. I'm not like you've got to use it. Yeah. I just think more like, especially for younger people. Whenever there's a new bit of fairly transformative technology, there's a lot of fear around it, and there's a lot of kind of like, oh my God, we can't have these essays. We need to tell them we've got a ChatGPT sensor that will. But actually, my take is more. We need to be teaching people to use it well.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of people who use it really badly and just cut and paste very robotic answers. But actually, I think once you become skilled at using it, it's another tool. Like a Google search is a skilled thing that we're much better at now than we were 20 years ago.
You don't have to open a drawer and go through the little cards.
Yeah. And it's the same with all those things. And you need to, you need to kind of get educated and take the best.
So let's go to that because that's very much, it's such a beautifully simple idea, which good ideas are always the beautifully simple ones. But it's basically, what I took from it is, I think it was pitched slightly older than I thought. But that might be because I'm a bit thick. So I was going, I wouldn't have understood this when I was 8. But I mean, it's aimed at children under the age of what? 14,
it's kind of 8 to 12 is, I think, what we say. So it's kind of like late primary school age group.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. There are some ideas in here.
It's pitched quite high.
Yes.
I mean, you've got to be, you've got to be aware of things. But can you tell me what inspired that? Yes, and explain what it is.
Well, so what it is a book about the future that is based on science, but is really optimistic.
Yeah.
And I think when you say that to people, a lot of people are like, "Oh, hang on, if it's based on science, it can't be optimistic." But it can. And the reason that we wrote it was because we being me and my sister. So my sister's a illustrator, designer, and it looks amazing, all thanks to her. Yeah. We feel that there is just an incredible amount of negativity and doom in how we talk about the future. And by we, I often mean adults, like you even did it just when we were chatting. Yeah. Like, I'm glad I'll be dead. It's like quite gloomy. But yeah, you often hear, I was at the dentist with one of my kids the other day, and the dentist was like, well, I'm glad I won't be alive in 2070. Right, we kind of talk in this way as if that's all right with kids. And that's like, what are they hearing from those conversations? And of course, they know a lot about the climate crisis, and they know a lot about, the loss of biodiversity and all of these things they hear about. And they feel, or I think there's a danger that they feel that it's doom and all hope is lost. Yeah. And I think that for me, so there's kind of like a connection with some of the neuroscience, because actually from a position of what helps the brain act in a good way, fear-mongering is really counterproductive. I don't think you hear doomy messages or fear-mongering and think, I must really try and do something to overcome that. You feel helpless and you feel
depressed and miserable, and you want to withdraw.
And depressed and surprise, surprise, rates of anxiety and depression in young people are higher than. But also
anger as well. I think you can, that it can fire up anger. It's very easy.
Absolutely. So we wanted to show that there are reasons for optimism based on the millions of fantastic people working all over the world to make the world a better place. And if we'd spare a bit of time to sort of just imagine where that could get us, if we all kind of like join the fight, and if things go well, then that's really important, because that's something that is really going to energize people and make them want to get to that place rather than hide or run or whatever they might feel like doing when it's all feels desperate.
Yeah. But then so what I didn't realise is that there is a character, and I can't remember their name, Kit, who is alive in 2070.
Yes.
Is that right? So they're looking back at their history. It's like us looking back to the First World War or the turn of the last century.
Exactly. So we wanted to have a character who was kind of like the kids who will be reading it, but who's speaking to them from the future. So in each chapter, there's kind of like a little sort of cartoon story, basically, of Kit and her friends and just them getting up to their normal business. But in the course of them getting up to their normal business, they might, like, you know, one example, they are learning about fossil fuels at school in the Augie, which is like the augmented reality area, where they, instead of just sort of like learning from a dry textbook and writing, they experience things.
So they go in a coal mine.
So they go in a coal mine and they experience what it's like to be in a coal mine, and they're completely amazed that we ever used to have these things, because they don't know them, because they're gone. So it's kind of a device for doing that sort of thing, and sometimes for doing kind of like little silly things, like there's a bit where they go vintage clothes shopping, and one of them finds a football shirt from when England won the World Cup in 2038. So we can like sow little seeds of like things like that in. So that's one part of the book. And then another part, because what we didn't want to do was just say, oh, look, 2070, it's all fine. We've sorted out everything. The oceans are clear. You know, we've come to a really good kind of middle ground with AI where we use it for good, but not for bad. We wanted to be more, to articulate the journey more than that. So each chapter has timelines which take us from now in the 2020s through to 2070 with like examples of things that could happen, which might be, you know, big international policy decisions, or they might be small changes in local areas, but that all add up to show a sort of pathway for how we can get there. So that was always a really important ingredient, I think, of the book. And it's also that they're quite dense. Like when you say it's, you could imagine it being for older groups, because actually within one tiny little bit of thing on a timeline, there's kind
conversation.
There's a conversation.
But I mean, that's what it would be amazing. I mean, I'd want to try it. I'm trying to think of all our peers, kids of, you know, they've either got grandchildren who are tiny or they're grown up, but I would love to sort of read it with a 10-year-old and have that, because I would think it would inspire conversations. I mean, that would be...
Well, so one thing we really are working on at the moment and talking to schools about is developing a schools program, which is kind of Futures Club, which is just exactly this. It's like slightly reframing that thing about the future. So it's like so there's one thing that I think people do with kids when they're saying, oh, it's all doom and gloom and disaster, is you're going to have to fix it. And we don't want to have that either, because that's not fair. But I think we do want to give them control in the sense of being able to think about and imagine what is the future that they would like to live in. What do they want, you know, when they're having children, what do they want the life of their 10-year-old to be like? So that we're developing this program of activities that just gets them, asks them questions that they don't often get asked. Like, I think that children have such incredible ideas, and when we allow them to think, which I think there's a whole sidebar here, which is about our education system, and I think problems with that. Because when we ask them those sort of questions, what you get back is just, it's amazing. And so when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at the creative process in children. That's what I was doing. And one thing I did is I got them to do drawings and paintings and different things, and I videoed them. And then we would play back the video after they'd finished, like sort of like almost frame by frame, second by second. And they would talk me through what was going through their mind.
So they would watch it. They'd watch the video.
We'd watch it together, and it was kind of like, I mean, I don't know if you ever found that in telly, but I always, like when we used to make documentaries, and sometimes you'd show it to people before it was going out so that they knew what was coming. And people would always be transported to a particular moment from seeing that footage. Like they'd know what was in their head. So it's kind of using that idea to get them to articulate, like, why was it then you kind of like were drawing a camel and then you started putting sweat on the camel? What was that about? And they'll tell you exactly why that was. And I think that what that made me realise is that there's loads of things that we just don't ask children. Like we don't have the full range of conversation that we could and should have with them. Because when you do, and I think that will be really true with the future, because we've just done it in a very little kind of like piloty way, but the things that they think about and the ideas they have for inventions. I mean, sometimes they come up with things and we're like, yes, we got that in the book. We didn't steal their bullets. But yeah, that's our real hope, is that this is, I mean, it's just a book. There's millions of books. Who knows whether anyone will even buy it. But that our hope is that it starts a bigger conversation about thinking with the possibility of hope and optimism about the future.
But also, I think the important thing, which is, I think, what we've both spent quite a lot of our lives doing, is saying that the wood that's in that chair that was cut down from a tree and it was taken to a factory and it was planed and milled and it was put glued together, and that glue came from this and it was used by what the world we live in didn't just happen. And that's become my obsession in my latter years, is going, someone said it to me a couple of years ago, and it's so obvious, and I know everything we use is either grown or dug up. And I'd never really thought that before. And I immediately tried to think of things. What about honey? Well, it comes from stuff that's grown. It's very silly.
No, it's a notion, great thought,
until you realise it, you go, God, there's nothing in our lives. Everything in here was grown or dug up. Which is quite a challenge.
See that, like to say that to a group of 10-year-olds, I think would be mind-boggling.
I wish someone had done it when I was a kid, because the world just became normal and actually for me it was through doing weird telly programs. So how do they do it? Go to an oil refinery. I never thought about that, and this is before I had anything to do with electric cars. Filmed there for 2 days. Amazing engineering, amazing science, incredible skill of the people who do it, phenomenal scale. And that's where so there's that petrol doesn't come from a petrol pump. It comes from this vast, toxic, massive scale thing with ships that are the heaviest ships in the water that use the most fuel. I mean, all those things. I just delivered them. And an oil tank uses more fuel than any other ship on the ocean because it lies so low in the water, blah, 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 all that stuff. Anyway.
But I think that understanding that the world is a series of processes, I think can be quite overwhelming, because you realise, got to change this one little thing. You've actually got to somehow weave your way right back through that whole process. But I think it is also empowering in the sense that you understand the building blocks of what makes things. And you can see where the kind of like the weak points might be, or the points where you might want to intervene to change something.
Because I did love that about I can't remember it exactly, but the kind of history of how fossil fuels were gradually eased out. Because I mean, the scale of that, of how we wean ourselves off the fuel that we've built, effectively built our entire world economy on. It's quite a big thing. And I think, imagine a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old grokking that, if you like, going, oh God, everything. What about medicine? Yep, medicine, all plastics,
all of that.
Medical equipment. If you look in a intensive care thing, which I did in Australia last year, I was like, all of that is 90% of the stuff in this room is made from fossil fuels, including the drugs, including the actual, the base materials that are in the pharmaceuticals.
And again, I'd say it's kind of a two-sided thing where you can think, oh my God, that's so overwhelming, there's so much to unpick, or you can look at it. And what I liked about kind of researching this book and thinking on a slightly different level is, if you think about the history of humans, you just see the fossil fuel period as an era. Like we did invent all of that. So of course we can uninvent it and we can invent something else and something better that can make us live better in so many different ways.
Well, next week, literally next week from when we're recording this, the last coal-burning power plant will be closed down. It's just outside Nottingham on the 30th. So, and that is, you know, when we met, we were 65% powered by coal.
Great fact.
So, and it's now 0.
And we're still so young.
And as viewers will be able to tell as I throw back my thick, dark locks. Actually, I did have hair when we met. I had proper hair.
You did? I think you might. Did you have a little bit
I don't think.
mullet?
I didn't have a mullet.
I mean, you should claim it now because you could have been like 25 years ahead of the time. I don't think I had a mullet,
but I might have had a bit of a quiff.
But yeah, I find that really heartening in a way that we can make. And I think, again, looking at things on a slightly different time frame, like it's so, like you listen to the news, of course you will get depressed. Like the news.
Yeah, well, it's in a sense designed.
It's designed to upset us.
Yeah.
But when you look on a different scale, you can see things like, my God, like change is possible. If you look back at how much change has happened, it makes you feel much more girded of the loins to think about the possibility of changing things for the future.
And I mean, that's in a sense what the show, what this, you know, Fully Charged and all the rest of that is about, is trying to find those positive, the sort of seeds of those positive stories. And we're constantly knocked back because we'll, like, for instance, we'll find a company that is making, oh, that is brilliant, what a genius idea, and they go bankrupt.
Yes.
Yeah, that's happened a lot. You know, it's really, really hard to get over that lip of actually becoming a Tesla.
Yes.
But it is happening, which is very encouraging. And that, I mean, that is why the optimism in there kind of tied. As soon as you mentioned it to me, I went, oh, I really want to talk about that because that is. But the other one I really want to do is the space stuff, which I loved. Which in a sense is sort of the circular thing of my knowledge of you. You know, it started out with Apollo 13.
Oh yes.
I'm kind of.
Oh yeah. Oh, wedge it in.
Totally unconnected. I'm sure I can make them one. But that stuff of, you know, it isn't next year that we land on the moon and have a city there, or on Mars.
On Mars, yeah.
But it does still happen. But and those things take a long time.
Yeah.
Because that timeline I thought was great. I love that.
Oh, did you? It's really interesting. So my sister and I had big debates about the space chapter because I said we can't have a book about the future without having a space chapter. But she was like, but space feels like just full of billionaire boys and doesn't feel like something that is for everyone. And so in that chapter we tried to get something of a balance, like in the whole kind of like techno optimist, where are you thing. I think I am somewhere in the middle where I think that you know, I don't think technology at all is going to solve all the problems, and there are much bigger problems of capitalism and justice and things. But I think within the space chapter, what I wanted was, when you see that footage of the first moon landings, the whole world watching their tails, feeling like we as humanity have achieved this incredible thing. I really hope that we will be able to have that feeling again sometime. Like if we discover life on another planet, you know, like here we've got a little tardigrade, you know, like little ugly bug. But like that sort of like recentering of humans in the universe we've really failed as a species if we can't get excited about that. But in order to get excited about it, somehow space needs to be democratized. Like somehow we need to all benefit somehow from the, you know, what the exploration of space is doing. And I think in some small ways we have, like there was I think this was probably when we were first like doing Scrapheap and things, but there was a project called, I think it was called Galaxy Zoo or something, and it was a kind of like crowd science project where they would, it's before they had AI, I guess, that could do it. So real people could just go on a kind of NASA image bank and they had to classify different galaxies as circular or something else. And it was like a mass thing, but it got loads of people involved in excitement about science and seeing pictures from the Hubble telescope and things that you kind of get a little hint of excitement. But I think, again, on the news, what we hear is all about, you know, billionaire American tech people, like almost exclusively, spending ludicrous amounts of money on...
But I mean, what's annoying is, because it's not just them. I mean, they facilitated it, but I mean, the fact that that I don't even want to mention his name, and I'm not going to, but the fact that there has been a rocket that went up and then it came back down. I mean, for the first 10, they all exploded and crashed.
Yes.
But then eventually they didn't, and you cannot sort of not notice that. But then you also, what is not acknowledged, because that's what annoys me so much, is the brilliant engineers and scientists who we would have met. On, two of them would have worked on Scrapheap. Who made that work? It wasn't one man.
Yeah, I know.
So fucking annoying.
It is so annoying. It is so annoying.
You could argue that what he did do was find them and get them to work on it. You could maybe hand him that. That's all he did.
Yeah.
He didn't do anyway, I don't want to talk about him.
But you're absolutely right. And when you see their joy, like in those little snapshots, when the two
rockets came back down and landed, was extraordinary, absolutely. Yeah. But then because of the way that sort of usurped, in a way, NASA. NASA was kind of the coolest thing, and if you worked at NASA, you were a genius, and it was brilliant. And then that, which but incredibly expensive way of getting into space, and suddenly someone does it cheaper, and then you go, oh, that's capitalism is, I find, really annoying because occasionally it works really well.
Yeah.
And then quite a lot of time it doesn't, and it's incredibly brutal. And I mean, there was I haven't seen it yet, but there is a clip of American left-wing politician, old grumpy Bernie Sanders talking to Bill Gates. There's 3 billionaires in the world, and you're one of them. Why have you got all the money? Is that right?
Yes.
Is this good? Does that help build a good society? I don't think so.
And did Bill have a good answer?
I haven't seen the rest of it. It's just a clip.
Yeah.
But you did, because that was the one I loved. I just want to mention that is the centenary of the moon landing in 2069, which I thought I love that idea.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's a science fiction book I've read set on the moon, a detective series set on the moon, and the big moon base is built around where the Apollo lander still is, and it's a historical site.
Right.
And tourists go up and they can drive, but you can't walk near there because you don't want to mess up the first footprints, and they're all still there.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I don't remember whose book it was.
I did read a bit of science fiction, actually, and I mean, mainly with this, we mainly just talk to scientists, but I did read a bit of science fiction, and science fiction is incredible.
It's very clever.
It's so clever. And there's the kind of clever, oh my God, they just foresaw so much. And then there's a brilliant book by Marge Piercy called Woman on the Edge of Time.
Edge of Time, yes.
Have you read that book?
My God, yes. But when I had really a lot of hair.
It's
quite
amazing.
old.
It's really old.
Yeah.
It's probably in the 60s or 70s.
Marge Piercy. God, I haven't even heard that name for decades.
I know. And I'd not read anything else by her, but it's...
Woman on the Edge of Time.
It's a very unobvious, positive view of the future.
Right.
So it's written from the perspective of a poor American woman now who kind of goes through a portal to the future. It's kind of a feminist utopia, if you like. That's her particular thing. But there's lots of other things that have been fixed in the future. And it's really super interesting. I really... Yeah, read that book. We won't read each other's books, except you did read this, but
Yes, I did. I'm just checking time, but we're good. But I want to make sure. I'll plug it, and I want people to check it out because it is really good. And particularly, I'm sure a lot of people who watch and listen to this have children.
Yes.
I mean, if you've got kids, I'm just saying, if you've got kids between 8 and 12, future vision.
Stories of our brilliant tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, I think when we've talked about it with parents and teachers and those kind of people... two things I want to ask is the scientist you spoke to, but also let's do that now, we're on it, like parents and kids. So you've had some feedback from parents and children. I just mean in terms of kind of everyday conversations with people, but actually also from the scientists. So I would cold call scientists. I would email really high up professors of this, and the title of the email would say optimistic children's book about the future. And without exception, there was no one who said they didn't want to be interviewed.
Wow,
which you never, like even in telly, when telly is such a great calling card, you never get
someone
that.
always say no. Yeah.
And nearly everybody said, thank God that there is some stuff that is hopeful and optimistic about the future, because we're desperately in need of it.
Yeah.
But of course, all the people who are doing the work don't have time to talk about that. So I had amazing conversations with scientists and with parents and teachers, just saying we need basically tools to help buoy up the children and young people about like where things could go. And
we need a lot of engineers and scientists.
100%.
For the next 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of the points on the timeline, they are, about things getting invented and things getting built and things getting created. And yes, we really do. And there's a million brilliant jobs out there for...
I mean, I think because that's the one joy that I've had from doing Fully Charged, is that I've managed to sort of keep doing that aspect of it, which we did in Scrapheap. We would interview people, wouldn't we, and get in the background of how does this thing work? Let's talk to someone in the industry that makes them work, which was always a great thing. And that's been generally they are bizarrely the most optimistic. The people who are actually dealing with battery chemistry that's really complicated. And the last 4 ones they had all blew up. My favourite one of all was an amazing professor in Oxford who had made a battery that had at the time 10 times the energy density of the best battery of that era. And I went, oh, that's amazing. Can we see it? And he went, well, no, because there was a black burn mark on the bench. That was it there. Because they make them in watch batteries so that when they explode, they don't kill anyone. But but he wasn't going, oh, it just didn't work. He was really excited. Look at the size of that burn mark.
Absolutely, because I mean, that's another thing, another sort of like bugbear of mine, is that in terms of the process of science, like we never really see that.
No.
Because it's never on telly. It's not in... And
it's not even in a movie where the protagonist is always an ex-CIA operative who's gone to hide. Why can't he be an ex-battery engineer?
Yeah, but I think it's hard to document because it happens over a really long period of time. So really that guy with the burn mark, he'd probably been working on that for
decades.
Decades. And so that was an incredible trial. Like, what better reason for optimism? But you only understand that in the context of the work that's been done. And I think that's what this is, in a way, what we're trying to say with the book is there's loads of work that has already been done, which if we keep doing it and accelerating it, has got the potential to turn into amazing things. Because you're right, like I mean, it's not like everyone manages to see the optimism, but there is more optimism than you might think from just, going around everyday life.
Well, also, I think importantly for people who are directly confronting mineral extraction, refining stuff, big transportation, electric trains, electric car. The people who are actually there going, this isn't working, but we can do this. They're not depressed.
Yes.
The people who don't know how any of it works. Oh, it's all awful. It doesn't work. So they're depressed.
Yeah.
And they go, well, hang on, just look there.
Look over here.
Look at this.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing I spend a lot of time on Our World in Data.
Yes.
As I'm sure you do.
I have been known to waste 3 days solidly. Yeah. I must go to bed and I need to go to the loo.
Marge Piercy and Our World in Data. Top tips. But they had a sort of, they were looking at pessimism and optimism around the world.
Right.
And the most pessimism is really in the places where there's least cause for it.
Yes.
Because I think we have the feeling, we in the sort of privileged Western world, of having had the experience in the past of thinking the world's going to keep getting better and better and better, whereas actually the feeling that the world is changing for the better is a new thought for a lot of people living in a lot of places.
Well, I mean, if you were a man my age in China, you would have lived through the most extraordinary change. Yes. You would have been so poor when you were up to 25, 30 and working on a commune farm, and you would have had such a tough life. And now you could be a millionaire living in a fantastic apartment in Shanghai. I mean, I'm not saying that was necessarily good or happy, but your life would have been transformed. I mean, the amount of people pulled out of poverty in China is in the billions, and that is mind-boggling.
Yes.
I mean, then there's massive problems associated with that, but
yes,
that has changed in our lifetimes. You know,
Yeah.
and that was when I met some Chinese people recently that no longer live in China and are happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it was, going through the Cultural Revolution when you're 22 was not easy.
Whereas I think for us, we had it's hard to tell what is to do with a particular time and what's to do with your age at that particular time.
Yes.
But if I think back to the 80s and 90s in particular, it just felt like such a hopeful, optimistic time where anything could happen.
The Berlin Wall came down, the end of the Cold War, blah, blah, blah,
exactly.
blah, blah.
It felt like there were lots of things moving in a positive direction. So we, compared to that, we're like, oh no, but now everything's awful. But actually, not everything is awful.
No, a lot of things are hugely better, aren't they? Well, look, I'll just share something for future vision. Get a close-up in a moment. And it is brilliant. And it is written by Dr. Cathy Rogers.
I know, it's a bit wanker move.
I said
to put the doctor.
Proper doctor. Doctor and lovely Madeline Rogers.
No, that's not proper doctor. I think of a proper doctor as someone who can actually fix things. That's just Dr. Brain.
Well, still, it says doctor.
It says it. It is true, yeah.
And Madeline's well, is she? I do remember her very fondly.
Yes, she's amazing.
And beautiful illustrations. I mean, they really are, because they're very clear and not, but not fancy. They're really simple, and you understand them immediately. You look at them.
Good.
So very nice.
Well, also the thing that we really wanted, apart from amongst lots of other things, is if you picture a children's book about the future, probably what you picture is something that's very silver and quite streamlined, like quadratic straight lines. Whereas we wanted a book about the future that is green and has pages
lots of flowers
that looks like this. Like there's not. It's not tech overload. It's actually as much about.
I think it's very important to say I've picked up on my nerdy interests of space and energy and things. There's loads of stuff about biodiversity, about the oceans, which I then thought Jason might have had a word.
Well, they're quite a big part of the world as well.
Yes.
But it's as much about nature as it is about technology, I would say.
Yeah. I think we should leave it there, because we're going to go and have lunch.
We're going to have lunch.
We're going to have lunch. But
very civilised.
I just want to thank you so much, Cathy. Well, I want to thank you for doing this with me, but also thank you for being who you are and doing amazingly positive stuff for the world. It's a real joy knowing you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back next week with more guests and different things, but what an absolute joy to talk to Cathy. She is really inspirational. So I want to thank her very much. And that's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.